Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's Facebook Live series, the next episode of it. And I am beyond thrilled and honoured that Chip and Jan have agreed to join. I sent an email in hope a couple of weeks ago, and lo and behold, after the conference, there was an acceptance. For me, like I said, this is a bit of I said at the start of it, so you'll have to excuse the bit of fanboying moment of this, but I'm a great admirer of you, and I'm a great admirer of the work, and I have listened to a lot of stuff down through the years. But like I shared with you earlier on, the keynote conference, the keynote speech at the end of the 3P UK this year was perhaps one of the most impactful, for personal reasons that I shared with you, one of the most impactful things that I've heard in my life, and it resonates through every day today. And in the arc of this conversation, wherever we go and however it impacts, I am beyond grateful that you've decided to join us today. So I'm just going to ask you to introduce yourselves. If anybody needs to, if anybody watching this already needs to know who you are, but and we'll allow the conversation to go from there. So welcome, Jan and Chip. I deeply appreciate you joining me today.
Thank you, Billy.
Thanks, Billy, and it's really an honor, and it's it's always a pleasure to meet another soul who's found something inside and is trying to share it with the world. That's where it's at. That's the main thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely beautiful. So Jan and I, we were fortunate enough was that 1975? My God.
Yeah.
In 1975 for Jan to meet Syd Banks. At a time in our life which wasn't great. We were not doing very well. But that changed everything for us. And since then, we've had the opportunity to share this understanding in business, corporations, what you call charities, we call not-for-profits, the prison systems in the US. We worked with inmates, with addicts, drug addicts, alcoholics, and just people looking to find a better life. But
communities,
yes, communities, youth. We work with youth, and as I describe that, even it sounds impossible to me. That we've been able to do all this through the years, and maybe something we'll touch on as we go through this morning is that I call it the magic carpet ride. We didn't go looking for any one of those things. We found something for ourselves, within ourselves. Our marriage changed, our life changed, and all of those things just continued presenting themselves to us. Now, I know that sounds kind of woo-woo, but that's what happened, So I wonder if it would be a good thing just to start with our story. I don't know if this is a new audience, more or less, or
just go with it. Just go with it, and we'll go from there.
All right. So Jan, whatever you like.
Well, as Chip said, I ended up meeting Syd in 1975 just through some friends who we'd heard about Syd through these friends, but we weren't interested because everyone who we knew in our little community, just a handful of people, had been listening to Syd, and they were getting really happy-go-lucky, and we were on this serious search, this what we thought was a spiritual search, and which involved, Eastern religion and everything. And so, but that day that I ended up at Syd's house, because I was with our friends, I was along for the ride, and I met Syd, and he was talking to a small group of people, and I walked into the room as someone who had totally given up on my marriage, felt really bad. I didn't want to lose our marriage. Had a young child, a 3-year-old child, was very stressed out as a mother, felt like super insecure, worried about everything, and just unhappy. I was basically super unhappy person. And when I heard Syd talk that day, and after I let go of, judging what I'd seen of how he taught to people, I actually heard him talk for the first time. I'd seen the effects he had on people, but this is the first time I heard him talk. And he was just sitting in his living room sharing one beautiful truth after another. and each one just struck a chord with me. So I couldn't argue with anything he said. That was my first thought, is that's right. That's wisdom of the ages. And then he turned it over and he looked at me, and he was talking to everybody, but he looked at me and he said, if everybody in this room and in the world could see how beautiful they really are, and if they could see there's a whole other part of themselves that is absolutely perfect. And when I heard that, for some reason, I let it sink in, and I felt immediately like relief and hope about my life. I had a feeling that my life and my marriage were going to be just fine. It was more of a knowing. And then shortly after that, as he was talking, what occurred to me is all the wise people always said that you can only find truth in yourself. It has to, you can, and so that what hit me in that moment was this huge insight that it looked as if the wisdom was coming from Syd, but I knew that it was actually coming from inside me, and that wisdom had been inside me my whole life, and it would be inside me the rest of my life. And that was something that the words had been there, what the wise people said about how don't listen to me, listen to yourself. But that's the first time I felt that and realized that what they were saying. And so and then Syd mentioned that because there were several couples in the room, he said, I think you'll find it really helpful in life if you're ever in an argument, especially with your spouse, if you can just drop your side of the argument and just change the subject or do something else, but if just don't keep arguing. And so that kind of puzzled me because of our situation. But when I went home at the end of the day, I was so thrilled that I was going to tell Chip that the search we'd been on, we didn't have to keep searching, because this was the real thing. This was like someone who had really discovered the meaning of life.
Yeah, so was Chip thrilled?
Yeah, that's what crossed my mind there for a second. Well, how did that go down?
Well, it was terrible, actually. I mean, just looking back on it, Jan came in and she's all lit up and thrilled about something, and she's trying to tell me, and I'm like, give me a break, you know. It's not that simple. I don't want to hear about this. And she says a little bit more, and I'm like, oh my God, you've got to be kidding me, you know. It's a hard search. It's going to take years. Yeah. Just shut up, you know. Just don't do that. And we actually, I started an argument, and Jan just walked away. And I thought, well, she's met this guy, and it's, you know, maybe he's charismatic or something. So now she's on a little thing about it. It'll go away, you know.
The charismatics, that's right. Yeah.
So I went to bed last night, just shaking my head, and this will be gone in the morning, you know. And I woke up that morning and there was singing coming from the kitchen. And my first thought was, there's no singing in my house, you know. And Jan was just in a really good mood. So I spent the next couple of weeks trying to bring her out of that good mood. Yeah. Now, that's in hindsight. I didn't see that's what I was doing at the time.
I know, yeah.
You know, and so I would see her in that nice mood, and I would bring up literally something I knew would upset her, you know, and try and start an argument. I wanted her back where I knew the handles on the relationship.
Yeah.
You know, and the first few times I did that, she kind of bit and got upset a little bit, and I'm thinking, here we go. And
here's the crack.
I'd always see that moment, and I could just see it where Jan just wasn't going there. She would just stop and say, I'm going for a walk, or even worse, she'd say, would you like a cup of tea? No, I want to argue. You know? But I got to a point where I realized I wasn't going to be able to have Jan back where I thought I knew her. And I remember that, quite honestly, as the loneliest period of my life, because now I was really on my own. At least when we were miserable together.
Yeah.
And so now I was just truly on my own. And we ended up having a conversation with somebody. I won't go through the details of how we got there, but I was blaming this person for introducing Jan to Syd. And this is all your fault, you know. So we ended up talking to them. We ended up having coffee with them one day. They were old friends. And the woman turned to me and just quite innocently said, "Well, what's on your mind, Chip?" Which was like the worst thing to ask, right? And I just went into it. I got angry and I started telling her, this is a bunch of simplistic stupidity. And I said, "And you need to butt out of my marriage." I remember I said that to her, "You need to butt out of my marriage." And she looked at me and quite honestly said, "I have never had a single word or conversation with Jan about your relationship or your marriage." And I knew she was telling me the truth, right? So it kind of took the wind out of my sails. And then she looked at me and she said the strangest thing. She just said, "Chip, the only thing that stands between you and Jan and all the love and happiness in this world is thought." And my mind just reeled like, "Oh, here we go," But I happened to look over at Jan, and this feeling just rushed in, just enormous feeling of emotion and feeling. And it caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting it. And the next thing I knew in my head, and this is just my way of describing it, is I could see all of our fights as these little piles in my head, like all these different fights and arguments. And the thought occurred to me, of course they're just thought, what else could they be? And when I thought that feeling even got stronger. And then I stood up and I said, "This is a bunch of bleep bleep," and walked out. I didn't want to look at it. And Jan apologized for my rudeness and got in the truck, and we were driving home on the island. And I just had this feeling that I knew I didn't want to look at it, but I knew I was busted. I knew we'd found something, right? But I wasn't ready to look at it yet. And it took me a while, a few more days before I started to kind of look at it. And then I had this experience, which I didn't understand at the time. I understand now. But a few weeks later, I forget how long it was, but I was sitting on the couch one morning, and I think I'd heard Syd speak once or twice by then. I still wasn't getting it, But I was sitting on the couch one morning, and Jan was on the floor with our son playing. And it was very early morning, and light was coming in through the window at a steep angle. It was in their hair. I was just looking at them, and it caught my attention. And that feeling rushed in again, just whoosh, And I just had this amazing feeling. And the thought that occurred to me was really simple. Just all I have to do is surrender to this feeling, And everything in our life changed from that moment on. And it took me literally years to understand what that moment was, but what that moment was my very first experience of seeing. When I looked at them, I saw them. I didn't see our history. I didn't see our arguments. I didn't see all the negativity we've been. I saw them. And I knew, even though intellectually I didn't know it, but I knew I was seeing them. And I knew that was the true reality. And that's when everything changed for us.
That's, to me, when something like that occurs, to me, it's the lifetime in a moment. That's how that's on a couple of occasions where I kind of going, oh, everything just coalesces and it's, for me, you describe it so beautifully, because it's hard to describe it as I see it myself. But out of that, then you like we were saying earlier on, you went off and you got your dream job, Chip. You went off to work with the Fortune 500, and we kind of rolled into the tandems of how life can appear as it is at the moment for me, how the dynamic of life can change. And often can appear that the worst thing that happens in our life can truly turn out to be the best thing. And if you'd speak to this, my experience has been, like I said to you, since the start of COVID, which is, my experience last week was the Armageddon of it. I can't reopen my business, and that's just the way it is. But my experience all the way through COVID, and especially over the last couple of weeks, is the opposite to what it should be. The experience of loss and of panic and of fear and of anxiety and the fear of the future and stuff doesn't quite seem to be there anymore.
Yeah, there's always two worlds happening at once. The world that we see through the lens of our thinking and our experience and our conditioning, and the true world. And the true world is always beautiful, no matter what's going on in the outside. You know, I was talking to a dear friend a while ago who was a very, very solid, high person, just a beautiful feeling. But the COVID thing, it was getting to them, you know, and like what's going to happen, you know, what's going to happen in the future. And it just popped out of me. I said, you know, you could get dumped. And I mentioned his wife. You two could get dumped on a desert island with nothing, and I know you'd find a way to be happy. And it just stopped him because that had already really happened to him in a way. You know what I mean? He was just caught up in the moment. And so life is a contact sport. Stuff happens, but when we keep turning inside and we keep getting quiet, we see the true world, and we see the beauty in this world as well. Like, you know, no matter what people are going through, there's beauty. It's not just the one thing, you know. Like this whole thing with COVID, I feel, of course, compassion and I feel for people that have suffered more with it. We're kind of in a bubble. I feel really, really lucky. And so I have those feelings, but at the same time, it's been an incredibly valuable time for us. It's like another settling down, another getting quieter, a little more time to listen to Syd's materials and read. And we feel ourselves like we're starting over again in a really beautiful way. Like we're actually starting over again with all of this.
And it's a new opportunity to learn, because when I look back to the fact that Chip was not happy when I became happy and he was fighting it, that was my opportunity to really learn from that insight I'd had at Syd's house that first day. I had to go back into my life and watch that insight play out in my reality. And what happened was when Chip mentioned that day when he looked at me and our son. Well, that had happened to me just before that, because I had been, when I first told Chip about Syd, after that, subtly, I was happy and I wouldn't react to his, you know, his upsetness, but somewhere I had in the back of my mind, well, he'll get this, you know, and I was kind of waiting for Chip to get this. And so I waited patiently, but still, that was it, you know, how I was looking at Chip. And so one day when I was just happened to look over at Chip, and he hadn't really found his happiness yet, and he was looking very stressed and unhappy, and when I looked at him, I saw his face change in front of me, because I realized, oh my goodness, I've been waiting for Chip to get this, and what I need to do is just look at him. He's beautiful. He's perfect. That's what this new understanding is all about, is seeing we all are that beautiful person. And so his face actually changed right in front of me, and then it went back, because I saw past the form basically, and then I saw just him in his, you know, his upsetness, but something had happened, and I share that because so many times in all the years we've been sharing the principles, we hear people want their spouse or someone in their life to get the understanding. And that right away is we're saying they don't have it. They need to get this, right? And so Syd always told us in the beginning, like, just see people in your world who you would like them to change. Just see them as perfect as they are. Just the way they are is perfect. And what I hear from that he was talking from a really deep spiritual level, where we are all perfect. And so much of our conversations with people involve people being upset about other people's behavior. And what I'm learning from my going deeper into this understanding is that that will always keep us in that same downward spiral in life.
Yeah.
If we're at the mercy of how other people's behavior either affects us or looks to us.
Yeah, we're running the rule of judgment over it.
Yeah.
You know, and the moment just the thought of judgment itself, just it's not the construct of what comes afterwards, but just the moment that you're judged, that you entered, you're lost.
Yeah.
You know, you everything else is going to. My confession here: my wife has no interest in this at all whatsoever. We don't talk about the principle. None of it. This conversation never happens. It just doesn't.
It's very wise.
And you know what? That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Because I literally went through that for a couple of years after I came across. If only my wife knew this now, she'd be perfect. You know? That's truthful, but that was but that's my stuff.
Yeah.
And then one day, you know, I just said, I don't need her to get it. That's entirely up to her. If she hears something, that's fine. If not, that's fine too. And it takes all the pressure off.
Absolutely.
And then you can actually learn from the other person.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Mm. And like he was saying about listening, and it's something that I said, well, I'd love to hear you taking it, because it was part of what moved me so deeply during the talk at the end of the 3P UK, and how it impacted my own life here. It really requires nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
There is no, as I see it, and from my experience, this doesn't come with a manual. It doesn't need it.
Yeah, it's built in.
It's built, you know.
It's a perfect system.
Yeah, you know, and all I just went, oh, maybe I should listen, and that changes everything.
Mm-hmm.
And listening is the portal to the world. You know, I say this often, but I think it's really worth repeating that to really deeply listen, whether it's to your wife or to a recording or to the birds, doesn't matter. When you really, the deepest listening is a type of listening where there are no thoughts from the past. You can't really listen at a deep level with thoughts from the past. You're either listening to those thoughts or you're listening. Right? And so that deep listening is the portal to the quiet mind, to who and what we really are on the inside. Right? And you can't make yourself do it, but you can be open to it, and you can just let it grow with you, you know. But it's those moments when the chatter from the past or conditioning or belief system just falls away for a split second. Right? You're literally stopping the world for a split second. And when that split second occurs, you're actually home. You're in your true self. And that's why that beautiful feeling comes about, because the true self is a beautiful feeling. Right? And listening is a lifelong thing to learn about. I mean, every time I think I've become a good listener, there's another whole level to find. And that's great. I used to not like that. I used to think there's always more, please. I want to just get there, you know. But I remember saying to Syd once, you know, am I ever just going to land and just be like totally happy? And he went, no. And I was like really disappointed. He said, do you think I am? And I said, well, I was assuming you were. He said, no. He said, I'm learning every day. He said, so yeah, you're not gonna just arrive and everything's, and he said, but how about this? He looks at me and says, how about this? How about if your life just gets better every day for the rest of your life? Would that be okay? And it's true. Yeah. Let me think about that for a minute.
For all of a nanosecond. You know, it is, with one of my clients in particular, it was something that we stumbled across, that she'd come across the principles a number of years ago. She'd been out to Salt Spring, etc. But when she'd come home, and after a while everything had she just walked away from everything, and it was fine. And recently in a conversation, and one thing leads to another, we were working together. But it's funny when you talk about her belief, that she was so busy looking for the eternal happiness. So busy because that misunderstanding had crept in that, this is the conclusion of everything. The moment the principles land, I'm going to be eternally happy and blissful. And it was kind of a shock for me to say it, for her to hear, like, well, that's not really what happens. What if you're just okay with your life right now? What if just being okay right now was enough? And it just took everything away.
That's beautiful. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's gratitude.
Yeah. That's another, I suppose there's so many ways of looking at we all, one of the things that has shown up through all of these conversations for me has been how we are the unique expression of one thing. That the Billy is a prism, that Jan is a prism, that Chip is a prism of just how that energy is bent into this forum. And it never gets old to sit and have the same conversation, because how I express it or how I experience it is absolutely unique to me.
Yeah. I love that you see that, Billy. I really do. Syd was very adamant about when we were with him that we don't try and talk like anybody else or talk the way Syd does. He would say, so many times he said to us, find your own voice. The only authority anybody has to talk about this is their own experience. Right? And there are people who I'm sure can speak much more eloquently than we can about it, but the bottom line is you can only say what you know. Anything else you say is just words. And people feel that. They feel that. They feel the authenticity, and that's what people respond to, that it's coming from your own experience. You're saying, this is what's happened to me. This is what I know is inside of me.
Because that's how it started.
Absolutely.
Syd, in the early days, there were hardly any people around, and he would just share what happened to him. And that story would just bring this feeling to me that I would be weeping with the feeling of beauty when he talked about after he had his experience. And he said somewhere, he talks about it in that recording the experience. And he said he didn't sleep for 3 days and 3 nights because so much joy and wisdom just kept coming to him. And so that the fact that he just shared that feeling, and then whenever he talked with us, it really was the same thing over and over, and it was so simple, but we heard it at a different level. And that's why when I start my day, I read a little bit of Syd, and I've read his book so many times, but I've been saying lately that the more I read them, the slower I read them. So I'll read a few sentences, and something will hit me, and I'll think, why keep reading? I've just heard something, and then I'll just let it sink in. And this morning, I got this insight, and when I was reading about, he was talking about mind. And sometimes lately, I've just been feeling like nostalgic about, when I was a child, or when our children were littler. And I sometimes I'll just think about nicer times, not nicer times, but times when I had special feelings in my life, and so I want to kind of hang on to that, and I know it's just I'm not really seeing clearly, but this morning what hit me is that the reason why we love beautiful memories is because we can't, we don't want to go, part of us wants to go back and relive it, but the reason it was beautiful is because we must have been in the now when we were having that experience. So when I think of when I was a child and we had a really nice family life when I was really little, and I want to kind of recapture that, and I'll think it's in the now. It's always in the now. And so that was to me a beautiful freedom, that we don't have to ever worry about whether life will keep bringing us something beautiful if we're always learning about being in the now.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago I wrote about an experience where on a particular Facebook group recently post the GP. I laugh about it now, because something had got out of hand in a conversation, and then it kept on going, and then the voice was saying, just be succinct and clear and say, look, this needs to stop, but that didn't happen. Okay, and what came off the top of my fingers wasn't what was down here, what was up here. And I realized, that, oh my God, wow, that was really, and, mea culpa. I could see, and I understood it. And from what I had said, I was wrong, because I got lost in that moment of what I perceived hurt, and I thought I was defending, and I just turned it into a complete circus inside in my head. And I accepted it, and I completely 100%, and I stayed with it because I was deeply uncomfortable for me, but in the discomfort of it is also the learning of it. But that following Saturday evening, I felt really done by the whole thing. It was been 3 or 4 days, and I was tired, and I went to visit my friend. And he knew I was very glum when I arrived to the house, and his house backs out onto the river. And he had, in the meantime, while he's been off, has converted his old place, and his beautiful little bridge built out into the meadow at the back, and he can walk out onto the river and go fishing. Oh, it's just lovely. And
That sounds wonderful.
it is really, it really is now. He's a ton of work done when he was off. And we walked down and we were admiring the little bridge work that he had done, and then we were on the field. And as I was walking across the field, and my head was still down and my heart was heavy. I just got the rush of the memory. The first time I walked in that field was 45 years ago, when I learned how to swim on that stretch of the river. And all the kids in the town learned to swim there. And as you got a bit older, and we were kissing girls got more and more interesting, and we were starting to smoke a few cigarettes, and we were getting cool and learning our game, because that's where we all hung out, and all of that came back, and it was glorious. And in an instant, I was full.
Wow.
And all I could think was, oh my God, Syd is right. Because when the past anxieties or misunderstandings and stuff that would have impacted our life so negatively, it steered its course with belief through our life. And when that drops away, and say, I don't know which recording said, is that when you look back, your memories are now beautiful pieces that bring beautiful feelings. And I kind of, oh, wow, Syd is right. Kind of no surprise there, but it's how it landed. And I felt whole, and I felt replete walking off the field.
Beautiful.
That's why Syd called his one book Second Chance. Yeah. There's no matter where you are, how out of it you get. All it takes is one more moment in the now, and it's not forgiven. It's just good, it's just good. It's just you're in that true world again. Yeah, there's a lot of, I think even in the Three Principles community, there's a lot of misunderstanding about insight. Like, people think they're looking for that big insight, and for us, when in the beginning, because we were searching in Buddhism and so on, we were always looking for the Big Bang, right? And you know, meanwhile, life goes on.
Yeah.
And what we began to see as we started to learn is that insight is only the beginning of learning, right? You have a beautiful moment, you're home, you see something clearly. It may be about a particular part of your life, but most of all, you just have that feeling of being home that you just described, right? And then you have to go out and live life, you know? And the learning happens when you're in your life and you're about to respond in a way you always have to a certain situation, or you know, your habit is coming back in, whatever it is, and it seems like the same old stuff, but it's not. It's not, because the light of that insight is shining on that experience now, and that's how you're learning. That's where the learning comes, and you actually begin to get grateful for that you're going to go through stuff, but it's not the same. It's truly not the same. The light of that insight is teaching you, your true self is teaching you to understand the game of life through those experiences. So insight is beautiful, and being in that feeling is beautiful, but the learning is continuous after that, and it's the insight that's teaching you. Like the very first insights we ever had are still teaching us. You know, 45 years later, they're still completely teaching us.
We're still digesting them.
Still digesting them, and we will until we leave this planet, you know.
Yeah. It's the unfolding. It's that. It's one of the, for me, my experience was just letting that go.
Yeah.
Just letting that go. I just, you're trying to find something. The notion of it alone was enough to keep you kind of back from the very thing you were that the search was about.
Well, if there ever was a rule of thumb, it's very simple, is that as long as you're searching, there'll be no finding.
You can't search and be in the now at the same time.
Exactly. And that's one we keep learning over and over again.
Yeah, presence is key. Presence is key.
I had this experience early on, just having this insight that just really shook me to my core, just like, wow. And it was the day after listening to Syd, and I couldn't wait. I wanted to tell him about it. And I phoned him, and there was no answer, but it was Sunday, so I knew where he'd be. I knew he'd be out cutting his grass or trimming his roses, one or the other. I couldn't wait. I jumped in my pickup truck and drove across the island to tell him about this insight, right?
Sit, look what I have.
Exactly. So I rolled down his long driveway, and sure enough, there he is with the ear protectors on, pushing his lawnmower. And I went running up to him. I said, Syd. He goes, and he takes the earphones off. So I start talking to him. Oh, he doesn't want to hear about my insight. And he turned away and walked away from me and walked into the house. Oh, you know. Then he came out of the house with the dog. And he started heading for the woods on the edge of his property. And I thought, oh, he just wants a better place for me to tell him about my insight, right? And so I started talking again. So we walked through the woods, and he kept throwing a stick for the dog that he picked up, and the dog would chase the stick, and he'd follow the dog, and I'd follow him. And this went on for about 10 or 15 minutes. So we came out to a bluff on the sea. And I thought, oh, this is it. It just found a beautiful place so I can tell him about my insight, right?
Yeah,
so
it's so special.
Oh yeah. He sat down on the edge of this bluff, and I sat down next to him, and I started to talk once more. So I just started looking out at the sea, and it was this incredibly sparkly salt spring day. The sea was just sparkling. There were sailboats, birds flying around, and it just, okay. So I just relaxed, and I was looking out at the sea and just letting it go. I just thought, Syd doesn't want to hear about this. So I finally got quiet, and I turned and I looked at Syd, and there were tears streaming down his face. You know, and he just had this incredible look on his face. And as soon as I saw that, I just filled up. You know, and I looked back at the sea, and I don't know how to describe it other than I felt like I'd never seen the sea before, you know. And we sat there quiet for about, I don't know, maybe half an hour or so. And Syd stood up, brushed himself off, picked up the stick and threw it back into the woods. The dog took off. Syd followed the dog and I followed Syd. And we did this all the way back. We broke into his yard and he walked over and put his headset on and started his lawnmower. I got in my truck and drove home. And there wasn't a word spoken other than me. And I remember that as the most beautiful moment I ever had in his presence. And he never said a single word, you know. And we talked about it later on because it was an amazing experience. And what he said about it was that the content of your insight's beautiful, but it's not what's really important. What's really important was where you were when you had it. That you were inside, that you were standing in your true self, that you were in the now, you know. And that from there, the reason wisdom exists, this is the way I see it. The reason we call it wisdom is from there, we look at the world from neutral. We can look back at this world we've been living in, but from neutral, right? And when you look at it from neutral, you see so much more. You see the truth of everything. And that's your wisdom. And that's how you sort out your life, because you see it from a different perch. You see it from a different place. And it's the seeing it from a different place that counts, not the details.
It's a very interesting distinction there, Chip. You know, there is, even for me, it appears downstream. You know, but it's like you say, it's the upstream. It's where you're at is where the juice is.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that everybody has that available to them without exception. Without exception. You know, it's like one of the most beautiful things that we learned from Syd is that when we meet people and we look at people, we pay no attention to the mask. You know, now we're not always good at doing that, but when we do, Syd would say, never mind the mask, talk to the soul behind the mask. And if you talk to the soul behind the mask, eventually that soul will talk back. So you see people with, you just see them as innocent. They're just, nobody on this planet gets out without being lost in their thinking. Some of it is more difficult than others, for sure. But it's still the same game for everybody.
Yeah.
When you look at people that way, like Jan looked at me and I looked at her and Syd looked at the world, right? You're looking at the true world, and it's the true world that allows you to correct the crazy world that we live in, to see it with humor and compassion and understanding, you know. And have once in a while to have a wee laugh at yourself. That's very helpful.
Yeah, yeah. When I look back, I do think that it is stock up the chuckles because, you know, there's a lot to laugh at. Yeah.
The thing that hit me when you were saying about Syd talking about where you were when you had the insight, meaning you were inside more.
Yeah, absolutely.
But also the fact that when you get an insight, if you're patient and know that if you want to share it, you'll end up sharing it when it's meant to be. So the insights I keep getting, especially in this quieter life we're having now, they come out automatically when I'm talking with people, or sometimes they'll come out. We don't really talk a lot about the principles or anything, but the insight, if I just let it sit, when it does come out of me, you know, to share with someone, it'll come out more beautifully and more purely because it'll be inspired by a feeling that I'm in at that moment. So you will always get a chance to share your insights in some way or another. If you trust that you don't have to be in a rush, it'll just And in the meantime, it's for you anyway. It's your own understanding coming to the surface.
I think, Jen, you've said something there that has become very apparent as part of this whole COVID experience. It's the T word, trust.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that is a big one.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
Yeah.
In times like this, test that trust.
Yeah.
But the testing's okay too. It's like tempering the sword. You know?
And trust is the opposite of worry. And we know that worry is not only futile, but it's actually, it's hurtful, you know, it can eat away at you. And so we're lucky that way because we help each other through that. But this is my deepest learning right now, is that we're forced to trust in the now, because like as you said, I
No
mean,
choice.
yeah, and like you don't really learn more about the principles the longer you've been around it, but you do learn from your experience. And I've watched over these 45 years it is now, what worry, how it sabotaged me. You know, you think you're protecting yourself by worrying, but it's the opposite. And so that's been my big learning, is to really, that, like you say, that trust, which is the opposite of insecurity. And Syd always said insecurity, it'll take many forms. And that's one thing that was hitting me at the beginning of all this was that I felt we were very taken care of, but so then I'd worry about the rest of the world. And it hit me one day, and I know that starts with compassion, but if it stays on your mind and it interferes with you just living and being present, then it's not really helpful. And so that's what hit me. Okay, so when the epidemic is over, then what will I pick to worry about?
Nice.
So Syd, that's what he said. Insecurity comes in many forms, but it's the same exact fact that insecurity is just a little wall we put up between our true self and our personal self. And our personal self, we don't know why, but it just loves to just try and keep that true self hidden away. And so whatever form insecurity takes, it doesn't matter, but it boils down to the same thing.
Yeah, we just had a very graphic example of that because of COVID. We were very worried. I was very worried, not Jan. I was very worried about a dear relative who's struggling, really struggling with it, right? And I kept going on to Jan about, oh, I've got to find a way to help him, you know, like. And Jan she said, I'm not going to worry about it. There's nothing we can do about it. It's not going to help. And I kept thinking, well, that's kind of cold, you know. and you know, she kept saying, look, if we just keep our own happiness, that's the best we can do for that person. And see, through the years, I know that's true, but I wasn't ready to let go of the worrying. So I worried I didn't sleep for a couple of nights, you know, and I was really in it. So it came time to talk to this person, and I had some things in my head that I thought, well, I'll say this, and maybe they'll see it.
I have my insight bag of spanners with me. Yeah.
Yeah, right. But what happened was, you know, we got on the phone, two of us, we had it on the speakerphone, and I looked at Jan, and she's like, she's fine. She's not into it, you know. And it just finally just clicked with me. And so we just had this everyday conversation about the weather and Salt Spring and this and that and a couple of old memories. And it just went really lighthearted. And this is what really struck me, is that the person that had the draggy voice at the beginning of it and the trouble there, you know, and by the end of it, they were chirping like a bird, you know. And we didn't talk about anything. And then I saw it again. You know, it's the sharing of health, the sharing of happiness, the sharing of love, that it takes care of it. Like the person went from one level to another without talking about anything other than the island and the weather and the seals that we saw out front, and you know. And when the phone call was over, I went right, you know, It does no good. It's natural. We all do it. I mean, it's unavoidable at times, but there's no answers in it. There's no help in it, actually.
There's no joy in it.
There's no joy in it. And it doesn't mean you don't have compassion. See, that's
Right.
the thing. We confuse worrying about people with compassion. They're two different things. Worrying is just your own thing in your head that you've been taught to do all your life. And the power of love and happiness and silence is kind of invisible until you just live in it, and then you see things happen around it. But we're so used to thinking we have to do something, say something. It's a different way to serve.
I love that. The power of presence.
Yeah, exactly. Syd was one day frustrated a little bit, and he did get frustrated occasionally a little bit. And then I could see the moment he just dropped it. Just stuff was going on with how the principles were going on, and he just dropped it. And he got kind of nostalgic, and he kind of leaned back in his chair and he said, I could probably do even more from the world if all I did was go out and trim me roses. And I'm like, how's that possible? But I think I know now what he meant by that. Living in that and maintaining the truth of that is way more powerful than fussing or worrying about anything.
For me, one of the big experiences recently, and it was back to some Syd audios being shared with me, and I started listening to them, and was that particular, things were starting to mount up, like I say, and one of the things that occurred to me when I was listening to the audio was this. That I could see that I had created all these little A to B stories, about if I do this, I'll do this and do this, and how am I going to do this? And I was really getting into it. And, sure, B doesn't exist to start out with. There is no this. And then I went, well, A doesn't actually exist either, because both are just, I'm here that I need to be here. But if there's no over here, well, there's actually no over here either. Neither exist.
Yeah, exactly.
Great.
And it kind of like the only way I could describe it was like a bubble. And I could see like all the different directions and routes that I'd been taking to make life incredibly difficult for myself in the middle of all of it.
That's beautiful.
Absolutely.
Beautiful insight.
Yeah, and the stories tend to collapse inwards. They just do.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say I was with my friend yesterday evening, and there was a moment I kind of went, oh, shit. I truthfully, that because, like I say, the business is closed and there's a lot of work now that has to be performed to tidy up everything with authorities and all that type of stuff. There's a ton of work that's involved in that. And I kind of went, it just kind of hit me, like a wave. Oh, shit, what am I going to do, And it was just in that moment. And it's the sight within, it's that moment. And the kind of, I don't actually have to go there. Wow. Because there was a time that actually meant something.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I realized I could just see, this is all going to settle down. Because before this arose within, the thinking arose, I was fine. And the story, it arose. And I say, well, I don't have to entertain that. That was just the thing that came through my mind. And an hour later, it was just drifting back. And there would have been a time, one of my mentors referred to it as my Alice in Wonderland. He used to call me Alice because if something like that would happen, I would disappear with it. It could be gone for minutes of time, And he says, one evening he was seated, actually introduced me to the principles originally when he came across it. And one day this was starting to happen, and he had just come across the principles, and he said, I'm not going there with you anymore. I'm not going there with you. No, it took me a long time to realize the wisdom of what he was saying to me at that stage. But that's what he said to me. I remember clearly on the call that it was just starting to, invariably it was the wife or the kids or the business, you know, the big things and subjects in life. And then I was about to take off, and I was, like you say, turning up the seat ready with me. Look what the problem is this evening. It's just, God damn it, anyway. And he said to me was, I'm not going there with you. Oh man, I was so deflated, because I was ready to give him a good hour of how tragic my life was.
That's a really wonderful friend.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That is a really wonderful friend. And down through the years, he modeled this for me. It's something that I have when I work with my own clients at the initial intake call. I ban all efforts to sound 3P-ish or sound like you know about therapy or psychology or any of these languages, please. Please just speak. That's because the narrative enters, and people want to kind of get in the way. To me, I can't hear what the people are saying. And for me, and you said it so beautifully earlier on, this has to be about the practical implications of the principles.
Yeah, if there are no results, nothing's happened. It's the results that tell you in this world what's happened.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful, because that's partly how you begin to see, how we're beginning to see. I used to think I live in this little world, and there's a spiritual world over here that I want to get to someday. Right? And then slowly, as you learn and you settle down and you get quieter, you realize there's only one world. It's totally spiritual. Whether we think it's not or not, it's spiritual. It just becomes a little more evident that way all the time. Every time something beautiful like you described happens, you see that no matter what's going on, no matter what the world is, it's still a spiritual experience. Right? In the last year or so, there's a thought that's been ringing through to me. I'm like everybody else. I get into struggling in my head and thinking about this and thinking about that, but there's a spiritual fact that when you look at it, puts it all in perspective. Every once in a while, I remember, or I get that feeling that consciousness itself is a moment-to-moment miracle. We're living in the middle of a moment-to-moment miracle and dancing off here in our heads without looking at it, But we're in the middle of a miracle right now, right this second, right? With consciousness and the love that flows through it. And it puts it in perspective that I'm worried about this little me over here doing this and that. Meanwhile, we're living in the middle of a moment-to-moment miracle.
There's really much you could say about that, is there really? That's just how it appears. That's a beautiful way of describing it. Just when you recognize what, and I say you, I mean me, when I recognize my version of that, that it just appears, everything appears so real when we're down in it. But in that moment, you just recognize, oh, Jesus, look.
Yeah, right.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I'm just conscious of the time. It's, like I say, we have, even though I sat here for 30 minutes, we have thankfully and joyfully and blissfully failed the 30-minute test, which is just brilliant, because it's such, I'm just unbelievably grateful that I'm conscious I've taken an hour of your time. There's nowhere to go, with this, truthfully. I mean, that's just a beautiful way to finish the chip, hand in hand.
Well, Billy, absolutely a treat to spend this time with you. This is really, this has set up our day. This is beautiful.
Yes,
I'm
I
delighted.
love your stories, especially
Absolutely.
your last story that you shared about just letting it go. This has been really beautiful. Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Yeah, I am just, like I say, back to my fanboy moment. You know, just by your presence in my life, it changed the course of something very important for me in the last number of weeks, and I'm profoundly grateful for that. Profoundly grateful for that.
The opposite is also true now. You've done that for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say that. It's really kind of you to say that. Can you hold on a sec, and I'll wrap it up, and I'll just to get to the other side of it. To everybody that has joined us or is going to watch this afterwards, I'd like to throw out big words at this, but I haven't got them. You know, I'd like to sound really wise and sage and talk, but there isn't. You know, to be truthfully honest, I have nothing to say other than say thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for taking the time out to watch this. I truly hope the experience for you was watching this was as partially as good as the experience I'm after having in the last hour sharing this time with Jen and Chip. Until the next time, thank you all so much for joining us. Jen and Chip, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for joining us. See you all next week. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Billy. Bye, everybody.